Hello everyone! This video will be on the 2.2 section of the IBAA curriculum. It is going to be a review for a lot of you from the grade 10 math, so if you need to review some concepts, please take some time to do that on your own. Please pause the video for a second to look at the concepts, contents for the section. There are no formulae for this section. One sentence that summarizes this section is that function is a mathematical model. Why do we learn this topic? What is a function? What is a model? What is a relationship? A model is a depiction of real-life events using expressions, equations, or graphs. A function is a relation or expression involving one or more variables. So a function is used as a tool to show a model. A relationship is between variables, so that is more mathematical terminology. The first thing that we should focus on is the last line of the conceptual understanding. A function has independent variables and dependent variables. For the IB level of mathematics, we're only going to think about one for each. These are what we call inputs and outputs, respectively. Think of the independent variable as a switch. I press a switch, so I have the autonomy, so I am independent. Think of the dependent variable as a light bulb. I can't light up the bulb on my own. I need a switch to be turned on. So I am dependent on the independent variable. Got it? Domain and ranges are closely related to these variables. Domain is how far the independent variables can go. Range is how far the dependent variables can go. You could represent it as an x is an element of all real numbers. For domain, and f of x is greater than 0 for range. If you can see a graph or a picture in your head, it is very clear. Consider a function f of x equals x squared. This function can take all inputs but only produce positive or 0 as outputs. That's why I wrote the domain as x is an element of all real numbers and f of x is greater than or equal to 0. I kind of wrote it out, but the function is usually written as f of x, and this is called the function notation. You don't need to panic. This is just a fancy word that doesn't carry too much significance. Just remember that within the bracket, there's an independent variable. The overall is a dependent variable. Sometimes people write something like y equals f of x. This is good. This is helpful, especially when you want to graph it, because the y tells you more explicitly that f of x will be the y coordinate of the corresponding x. When you solve questions, you could write something like f of 3, which we read as f of 3 or a function of 3. Then we can solve f of 3 equals 9. Sometimes you can even write f of 2x. Don't panic here as well. It just means that your input now will be 2x. Then it's going to be like 2x squared, thus 4x squared. Let's now move on to the inverse functions. You may think that this is a scary word, but again, calm down. We already know tons of inverse functions. An inverse function is simply a function that reverses or undoes the effect of a function. Think about plus and minus, multiply and divide, and square roots. If you do plus 2 and then minus 2, you get the original number. If you do multiply by 2 and divide it by 2, then you get the original number, so on. These are more like inverse operations, but they are very similar. We write the inverse function with a notation like f to the power of -1 x. I personally don't like this notation because it seems like I should do the reciprocal of this, such as f over 1 over f of x. But you don't get confused here. It's not like that. Let's find out the inverse function of our original function. Our function squares the input, then what should we do to reverse this process? Yes, we should square root it. Thus, our f inverse function is square root of x. Graphically, we can find that the inverse function is a reflection of the original function over the line y equals x. See when I punch in y equals 2x. Then, when I punch in x over 2, it is like a reflection over y equals x. You can see that the first blue line and the second blue line, the reflection over the y equals x, the red line. Let's try our original function, f of x equals x squared. Something is different, isn't it? It seems like half of the y equals square root of x is missing. Well, that's better because listen to this important part. This is really big. One input should not produce 2 or more outputs. Think about it. Imagine we pressed a jump button on a Mario game. Then suddenly Mario splits into 2 and is at 2 different locations. That would be wrong, right? Mario is not a double split experiment. Again, remember this one thing from this video. In a function, one input should not produce 2 or more outputs. I hope you enjoyed this video and try some questions in this section to really master the skills that we have learned in this video. Anyways, I'll see you in the next video. Best wishes.